I can't stop thinking about this creepy Reddit story. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10 at the time. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to take us to bed. My brother stopped on the way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before bed. These last few nights I've been too afraid to go to the bathroom because I keep seeing a man in stripes in the window. I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother trying to tell ghost stories, but she didn't react at all to his confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog that we used to have when I was little. When she blurted out, "Do you remember that time when I opened the door for the cops and the dog came into the house and tore open that big bag of dog food that we had?" This really took me by surprise because in all of the years that we had lived in the house, we had never called the cops. I asked what she was talking about and she looked like she had revealed something by accident. "I never told you because you were too young at the time, but one night I awoke to noises outside, and when I looked, there was a man staring into my bedroom. I can't remember all the details I gave the cops when they showed up, but I know it was a tall, white male, striped shirt, dark jeans. They said it actually matched the description of a man in the area they were looking for. He had just escaped jail on a murder charge." Now, I know it sounds obvious hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago when I was in my mid-20s that I actually put it together that my brother had been warning us about a murderer that spent a few nights casing our home. What if I told you there was a real place where you could travel back in time? Bold Street in Liverpool has been known for its time slips. And if you're just joining us, time slips are when you travel out of your timeline into the past or future. In 1996, an off-duty police officer was shopping with his wife on Bold Street when she went into Dylan's bookstore. Frank followed after her, but was almost struck by a car in the middle of the road. When he gathered his bearings and looked up, though, everything looked different, and Dylan's wasn't there. Instead, it was a store called Cripps. He went up and looked in the window, but didn't see any books on display. Instead, it was all women's clothing, hats, handbags, scarves. Except all of the clothing was very out of fashion, and not only that, but all of the people inside the store were dressed out of fashion. Old-timey clothes like it was the 40s or 50s. Suddenly, a young girl walks past him, still dressed in 90s clothes, and he chases after her into the store. When he gets inside, though, it's no longer the department store, it's back to being Dylan's books. He pulled the girl aside and asked if she saw what he saw, to which she replied that she thought that maybe it was a new department store, but when she went in, it had transformed back into a bookstore. He ended up telling his wife what happened, and she replied that Cripps was a department store in the 40s and 50s, but had gone out of business decades ago. So what do you think? Did this police officer and young girl time slip together? Follow along for more. Let's do a deeper dive into the real place where you can travel back in time. In my last video, I told the story of a time slip on Bold Street in Liverpool. And time slips are when you travel out of your timeline into the past or future. But that's not the only time that someone's time slipped on Bold Street. In 2006, a man named Sean was shoplifting on Bold Street when he was chased by a security guard down a side street, Brook Street. When he reached the side street, he lost the guard but got this weird feeling in his chest. Everything looked different. Cars were antique, people were in older clothing, traffic lights appeared where they weren't before. He said that there were even bushes where buildings used to be. And naturally, the first thing he did was reach for his phone, which didn't work. There was a newspaper stand nearby, and Sean asked for a paper. The date on it read May 18th, 1967. Sean freaked out and jumped on a bus, thinking that maybe he was just in the wrong place, and that's when everything kind of changed back into his timeline. The story goes that later on, when interviewed by a local newspaper, the guard that chased Sean mentioned he watched him disappear into thin air. One person mentioned that these time slips started happening after the Underground Railway was put in Liverpool, and that none of the time slips bring people back to before the railway was built. Could high voltage rails cause people to switch timelines momentarily? What do you think? Follow along for more. So some people believe that there's a portal to another dimension in Washington. In 1997, a man by the name of Mel Waters called into the Coast to Coast radio show claiming that he had a hole in his backyard that was 80,000 feet deep, and supernatural things were starting to happen. For context, the deepest mine shaft in the world is only 13,000 feet deep, and 80,000 feet is 15 miles deep. Mel claimed that during the day, a black beam like this one would shoot out of the hole into the sky. He also said that a neighbor dumped his dead dog's body into the hole, and the next day, the dog was outside alive. This is where it gets kind of weird though. So Mel's property was right next to the Yakima Training Center, which is a military base. And shortly after that first phone call, Mel claimed that the government tried to silence him and pay him out so he would never talk about this hole ever again. And then later, a satellite photo was taken of where Mel's property supposedly was, but it was completely blotted out with this big white square. Though it's been long searched for, no one's been able to find the actual location of this hole. But many people in Washington are convinced it exists and have dedicated lots of time and energy to finding it. This is actually a clip from the phone call.
I've got Mel on the line. Mel is the guy with the never-ending hole. Right now I'm in a little town called Ellensburg. Oh, I know Ellensburg. Oh, you really think you've got 80,000?
Yes. Yeah, I get line in 5,000 yard spools. I haven't gone through that many. As usual, I brought the dogs with me. They wouldn't go anywhere near the damn thing, and if I try to bring them there on a leash, they'll just dig their feet in. They do not want to go anywhere near the hole.
So what do you think? Follow along for more. So some people believe we live in a simulation, and that simulation sometimes glitches. We're talking about all sorts of strange and spooky stuff over here, so make sure you follow along. This story comes from Reddit user Feisty89, who was recommended a therapist by a doctor for some trauma they were experiencing. The therapist they met with was named Cheryl, and at first she seemed really nice. She gave really good advice, was a great listener, obviously had a ton of experience with trauma. So the next week's session comes around and Feisty starts off where they left off, but Cheryl looks really confused. At one point she stops the session to say that she doesn't remember any of this and asks Feisty to start from the beginning. Now, Feisty's story was pretty crazy, so they thought that maybe starting from the beginning would jog Cheryl's memory, but no, Cheryl didn't remember any of the story. This left a really bad taste in Feisty's mouth, but they figured they would give Cheryl the benefit of the doubt, so they go back for a third session. Except when they get there, Cheryl's office isn't there. The door was locked, the lights were out, Cheryl's name was even removed from the door. The building's receptionist tells Feisty that Cheryl's now located in the basement, but when Feisty gets down there, Cheryl's nowhere to be found. In a last-ditch effort, Feisty calls Cheryl and leaves a voicemail, and when Cheryl calls back, she said that she didn't have any appointments that day and that Feisty wasn't a patient. She had no idea who they were. So what could have caused a person to be completely wiped from someone's memory? Was it a glitch in the Matrix, or was Cheryl just hiding something? Would you believe that everything you've ever done or will do has been recorded by the universe and lives in a kind of library somewhere? And not only that, but with the right training, anyone can access this library and read your records. These are the Akashic Records, and during the early 1900s, psychic Edgar Cayce swore that he could access these records for anyone during hypnosis. Edgar has a really crazy life story in general. As a child, he could read an entire book just by falling asleep on it, and he even predicted the day he was gonna die. But for now, I want to tell the story of him and his wife. So in 1910, Gertrude, Edgar's wife, was told by a doctor she had 1 week to live. She had tuberculosis, which back then was a death sentence for so many people. Her brother had also recently died of the disease. But Gertrude knew that Edgar had a talent for reading the Akashic Records, and this was really early in Edgar's life. He hadn't done readings for anyone yet. She begged him to do a reading for her, but he was terrified. What if he saw something he didn't want to see? Like, what if there was no hope for Gertrude? But it was actually the exact opposite. Edgar was hypnotized, and in that hypnosis, he was able to do a reading for Gertrude where he found a specific cure for her tuberculosis. He suggested a mixture of bathing in sea salt, doing exercises with her arms above her head, and keeping her digestive tract completely flushed. And it worked. Gertrude was completely cured. After this happened, Edgar realized he needed to share this talent with the world and started doing readings for more people. He went on to become one of the most famous psychics of the early 20th century. He also never charged people for this service. So if you're like me and you're also looking for a little bit of psychic guidance, I would personally recommend Psychic Visions by Amethyst to start your year off. Wait, so I'm kind of freaking out right now. So a lot of people have been commenting that in one of my videos that I posted a few months ago, they can see a ghost. And I just went back and looked. And you have to see this. I love being home for the holidays in New England because everything just looks haunted all the time. Everything here is just haunted. If you can't see it, go back and look, but in the window, In the left-hand window, like there's definitely something there. I'm convinced of it. So there is an Area 51 in New York that no one talks about. Except for me, I'm so excited to talk about this one. Thompson Park in Watertown, New York has been known for its, quote, vortex for a long time. People have been known to mysteriously transport to different parts of the park. Some people even say that their loved ones have gone missing, and when they've found them, they're all disoriented, dizzy, confused. Other people have been known to lose track of time and say they have hours in the park that they can't account for. The story actually came to me from Instagram, where a user said that years ago she was in the park with her boyfriend and his family, and the two of them just went for a walk. According to her, they were gone for maybe 20 minutes, but when they returned, her boyfriend's family was furious with them. It turns out they had actually been gone for 2 hours, to the point where the boyfriend's family went searching in the park for them, even calling out their name, but neither of them heard the people searching for them. Paranormal investigators have also found that there's a high level of electromagnetic field in the park, but some people just chalk it up to there being mineral deposits in the area. I also think it's fun to mention that the original code name for Area 51 was Watertown, because it's where the CIA director of the time was born. Is that just a coincidence? I have no idea what's going on here. I hope to one day be able to go for myself and check it out. But in the meantime, just please keep sending me your crazy stories on Instagram. I literally live for this stuff. How can so many people around the world see the same figure in their nightmares? Heads up, I spent a lot of time reading about this yesterday, and it kept me up all night. So around the world, a ton of people have claimed to have seen the same tall, shadowy man wearing a hat during their sleep paralysis. He's actually so well known that he's been given the nickname Hat Man. I kind of initially thought that this was another scam, like the Have You Dreamed This Man marketing ploy that I did another video about, but no. I looked it up online, and there's a ton of people sharing their experiences seeing Hat Man, and in all of the descriptions, he's the same, a tall, looming man wearing a wide brim hat. Also, just a quick explanation, but sleep paralysis is when your brain wakes up but your body doesn't. So you have chemicals that are released when you sleep to make sure that you don't act out your dreams during your REM cycles, and that's what paralyzes your body. Sleep paralysis is when you are mentally awake but physically asleep. People do tend to hallucinate during this time, but it's weird that so many people have seen the same figure. So I've actually struggled with sleep paralysis since college. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night. I can see the room that I'm in, but I'm completely unable to move, totally paralyzed. I start getting the feeling that something has crawled into bed with me, though I can't see what it is. I know that it's a man, and I can feel him wrap his arms around my body while he's breathing in my ear and just squeeze so tight that I stop breathing. I'm paralyzed in this time, so I can't turn around to see if he's wearing a hat, but I do know it's a man, and I get this overwhelming sense that it's evil. So I don't know. I don't know if we all watched Nightmare on Elm Street way too young and have just kind of associated a man with a wide brim hat as like some sort of sleep demon, or if this is actually some entity that lives in the space between awake and asleep. But I would love to hear your experiences. If you've had any experience with Hat Man or you know anyone that has, please mention it in the comments. I'm so fascinated. Do you believe someone could disappear into thin air? Part of Southwest Vermont has been dubbed the Bennington Triangle due to a series of 4 very bizarre disappearances that took place between 1945 and 1950. Upon first glance, this feels like a classic serial killer tale, but there's only ever been one body found, and the cause of death was inconclusive. And one story is so strange, you have to hear it for yourself. In 1949, veteran James Tedford was on a bus from St. Albans when it passed through the Bennington Triangle. There were 14 other people on the bus, and eyewitnesses confirmed that James was on the bus before it reached its last stop, which was Bennington. But when the bus actually pulled into the last stop, James was gone. There was no way to leave the bus without the driver seeing, but the bus driver confirmed that he never saw James leave. And James's luggage and an open timetable were both left on the bus. His family immediately reported him missing, but he was never found. Some people say that the Tedford case is just local lore, but it was written about in the local newspaper right after it happened. The scariest thing about the James Tedford case is just that the other cases in the Bennington Triangle also were all vanishings without any sort of trace. Like, there was nothing left behind to indicate what would have happened to these people. They all just in thin air. I'm going to talk about the other cases as well as what may have happened in a part 2. Do you believe that people can just disappear into thin air? We're talking about the Bennington Triangle, a section of Vermont where people have mysteriously vanished over the course of a few years between 1945 and 1950. Sounds like a serial killer, right? It's a lot weirder than that. In my last video, I talked about James Tedford, a man who seemed to apparate on a bus. But what about the other missing people? A 74-year-old hunter named Mitty Rivers was out with 4 other people when he mysteriously vanished. It said that he ran ahead of the group to get back to camp, but by the time that the others had reached camp, he was gone. Despite a massive search party of over 200 people, he was never found. And he was a woodsman. He would have known the area really well and been able to survive in the woods. In 1946, college student Paula Weldon also vanished. The last person to see her was a night watchman who gave her directions. He also said that she was wearing this bright red coat when she disappeared, which would have made it easier for other people to identify her, yet no one recalled seeing her that night. A few years later, 8-year-old Paul Jepson went missing in the same area as Paula. He was out with his dad when he wandered away from the car, but was never seen again. Then, 2 weeks after Paul disappeared, in the same area, there was another disappearance, but this one at least gave a little bit of insight. Frida Langer was out on a hike with her cousin when she fell into a creek and needed to run back to the base camp where her husband was to change her clothes. In the short distance between her cousin and her husband, she disappeared. Except this time, a body was recovered, except that it was 6 months later, and also it was in an area that had been heavily searched already, leaving a lot of people to think that maybe someone dumped her body there after the fact. Someone went missing in the same area, which sounds like a serial killer, but serial killers have types. The fact that it was like 2 older men, 2 women, and a young boy doesn't really prove the case that it was a serial killer, and also no evidence of that was ever found. However, there are a lot of local legends as to what could have happened, which I'll talk about in a part 3. So interact with this video if you want to hear about the aliens and Bigfoot that was maybe in the area at the time, because it gets really... Do you think certain objects can make you travel in time? In the early 20th century, a woman named Alice Pollock was invited to see Henry VIII's room. Alice was actually born into the aristocracy, which gave her access to Leeds Castle when it wasn't open to the public. Alice wandered around the castle, even touching a few objects as she wandered in between rooms. However, when she got to one room, Alice mentioned that the energy completely changed. She said the air became really cold and the carpet vanished. She saw a tall woman in front of her pacing back and forth, clearly worried. The woman was wearing a long dress and her hair was up in an outdated fashion. Alice caught a flash of her for a brief moment before everything snapped back and the room looked exactly like it was before. After she left, she couldn't stop thinking about this encounter though, and she researched it extensively. What she found was that the room she was in was actually where Henry VIII kept his stepmother locked away after he accused her of trying to overthrow him as king. She eventually was found innocent and he released her, but not before he had her completely imprisoned in the castle. So what do you think? Did Alice touch something that made her slip back in time? Follow along for what's going on with these supernatural lights in Texas. At the end of a dark, unpaved road in Saratoga, Texas, visitors can see this light, which reportedly has no source. People have tried to approach the light, but no matter how close you get to it, it just moves farther away. Legend has it that back when a train ran through this part of Texas, a conductor was actually decapitated, and now he searches for his head every night with a lantern. Many visitors have seen the light and even caught it on camera, but no one knows where it comes from. So what do you think? What could it be? So apparently 2 nights ago in Ireland, hundreds of people reported seeing the same UFO. This is apparently a picture that someone caught of it. It was flying very low, was V-shaped, super bright, and very quiet. People also claimed that it just seemed to evaporate out of thin air, which it is really cloudy out, so maybe it disappeared into the clouds, but that's also pretty crazy. It literally looks like a train car that split in half and like half is dangling over the side of a cliff. So what could this be? This could be an alien invasion. God, I hope so. There's also, I don't know, a massive war happening. There's going to be lots of planes that we cannot identify flying around because of that. If anyone has more information on this, please drop it in the comments or shoot me an email because I am fascinated. Look at this tree. It kind of looks like it's walking away on its own. So someone sent me this video of a potential skinwalker in the woods, and wait till you see this next part because it's so much worse. Watch this tree right in the middle. Watch, wait for it. Like, it looks like it's just walking away. Did you hear about the evil spirit that was just released in Japan? So legend has it that this rock contained the evil spirit of this beautiful woman 1,000 years ago who was contacted by a warlord to kill the emperor. Her true form, however, was that of a 9-tailed fox seen here, and her spirit was supposed to be trapped inside of this 1,000-year-old piece of lava. That, however, was until this weekend when a hiker noticed that the piece of lava actually had split in half, sending many people in Japan into a total tailspin. So what do you think? Has an evil spirit been unleashed onto the world? I guess we'll find out in the next coming weeks. Okay, so this is something absolutely terrifying that was just caught on camera in Mexico. So I have no idea what's happening here. This thing floats down from a little hill into this like parking lot, and then these dogs just start losing their mind at it. Here's like a closer look. So it's floating down, the dogs come out, they're freaking out, which is always a bad sign, and then it just starts gliding away to the side of the parking lot. It kind of looks like someone hunched over, or maybe like a person with a small child, and then it goes over this little blip and turns into this like form. What is happening?
Apparition caught on camera in Mexico. Watch it change form.
What would you do if someone offered you a magic potion that would cure all of your ails? But the price for that potion was your life. This is the story of Eben Byers, a wealthy socialite from the 1920s. Eben was on a train in 1927 when he fell from his sleeping bunk and severely injured his arm. Fearing he'd never be able to play golf again, Eben went to many different doctors, but no one was able to help. That is, until he met a doctor that prescribed him Radithor. In the 1920s, Radithor was known for its magical qualities. Eben's arm pain went away immediately, and he started feeling amazing. So amazing that Eben was reportedly drinking 3 vials a day. This continued for 3 years, and Eben drank over 1,400 vials of Radithor. But then, one day, all of the medicinal effects of Radithor stopped. Not only that, but a lot of Eben's bones started breaking, and he was losing weight rapidly. This is when Eben learned that the doctor he saw was not a doctor. He was a failed med student and a peddler of pseudoscience. Also, Radithor wasn't magic, it was just tap water spiked with radiation. For those of you that don't know, radium, when ingested, gathers in your bones and starts destroying them from the inside. By the time Eben learned this, he had drank 3 times the lethal dose. Eben's bones continued to break, and by the end of his life, his entire jaw needed to be removed. Reports even say that holes were starting to form in his head. So let it be known, if it sounds too good to be true, it might just be radiation poisoning. So I can't tell if these posters that have been popping up around LA are nonsense or terrifying. So this is the first one that someone sent me, and it's basically saying don't be a scoundrel in the park, which is fine, but the grammar is insane, and it starts talking about this man in a rubber face that's gonna come get you. And then this one starts being a little more threatening. It's still talking about like not littering in the park, great, but then also if you're acting like a macho type, you will be got by a man in a rubber kind of face, which that starts to get a little scary. And then this third one starts talking about being buried alive by police. and I'm very confused, and it's still written in like crazy grammar, so I can't tell if this is someone who just is having an episode and wrote these posters, or like if this is kind of terrifying. This is one of the most bizarre missing children cases I've ever heard. So in 1928, Christine Collins' 9-year-old son Walter went missing near his home in Los Angeles. At the time, there was a serial killer named the Fox kidnapping and killing children in the area, so when Walter went missing, the public was like really freaked out. And because of that, the Los Angeles police wanted to find Walter and tie up the case really quickly to put everyone back at ease. 5 months later, Walter is miraculously found in Illinois. The police arranged for a public reunion, but when Christine got there, she insisted that the boy was not Walter, not her son. She tried to tell the police and they told her to try the boy out. Christine kept insisting that the boy was not her son, so much so that LAPD had her committed to a mental institution. You know, rather than admit they were wrong. Also, back in the day, mental institutions were like CBD for women. Oh, you're not feeling well? Why don't you get committed? Are you stressed out? My mom swears by getting committed. Eventually, the boy admitted to being a 12-year-old con artist from Illinois who wanted to come to LA to meet his favorite actor, Tom Mix. And here you can see how different the two boys actually looked from each other. In reality, Walter was actually killed in the Wineville chicken coop murders, which is so messed up and deserves its own video. And his mother was never paid the money that she won in a lawsuit against the Los Angeles police. Las Vegas has a dark and haunted past, but one of its darkest stories takes place at the Flamingo Hotel and Casino. The Flamingo is a time capsule, part Palm Springs desert oasis, part zoo. Look, real flamingos. It's actually the oldest casino on the Strip, and it almost never existed. Also, no one knows who killed the man who created it. So Bugsby Siegel was a mobster who came to Las Vegas in 1945 chasing his love of gambling. And he already had quite the reputation. He formed Murder Inc., that little group of contract killers that maybe killed over 1,000 people. Bugsy took over construction from the original owner, and rumor has it he named it the Flamingo after his mistress's red hair and long legs. Construction costs started soaring. First it was $1.6 million, then it was $4 million, then it was $6 million. All of this money was borrowed by Bugsy from the mob, which would have been fine, except 2 weeks after the Flamingo opened, it closed its doors. Business was terrible. Eventually, it reopened its doors to huge success, but it was already too late. The mob saw this as a loss. Also, they found out Bugsy had been pocketing a lot of the costs. On June 20th, 1947, Bugsy was shot through the window of his Beverly Hills home. Visitors say they can still see his ghost walking around at night, but you'll have to see for yourself. Okay, someone sent me a video of a creepy doll, so we're watching this together. Already there's a doll in a... What is that? Why is there a doll in a cage? This is already insane. What is going on here? So we see, okay, we're zooming in. Cat's mad dogging these dolls. Something is floating out of the dolls that have a cross on it. Also, what is going on back there behind the cat? Like, what is this guy? Nobody has any business being there. Okay, so initially I wasn't going to talk about this case because I can't even look it up without losing sleep. It's that disturbing. But enough people said they wanted to learn more about it. So the Wineville chicken coop murders were carried out by Gordon Northcott, seen here looking like an absolute psycho, in the 1920s in Riverside County, California. It's important to know too that Gordon was in his late teens and early 20s when these happened. So it all started when Gordon's parents bought him a chicken farm in Riverside County, California, where he was going to stay with his little nephew here, Sanford Clark. And Sanford's actually the reason we know any of this happened. It's all of his accounts of what happened at the chicken coops that was able to piece together the crimes. So according to Sanford, one day Gordon went over to Sanford holding a bucket and said, "Do you want to see what's inside this bucket? I caught something." And of course he hadn't caught anything. Inside of the bucket was a head of a child, and Sanford didn't know what to do. He had never seen this before. But Gordon was laughing and laughing and laughing. He thought it was like this huge hysterical prank that he had pulled on Sanford. The worst part is that Sanford's parents actually came and visited the chicken coop not long after that happened, and Sanford tried to tell them what had gone on, and Gordon was able to convince his parents that he used self-defense to decapitate the young boy and put his head in the bucket. Apparently, when Gordon's mom heard what happened, she cried and hugged him and said, "You did what you had to do." So of course it got exponentially worse after that happened. And according to Sanford, shortly after was when Walter Collins, who I did the other video about, showed up on the chicken coop farm. And again, there's no hard proof of this, but according to Sanford, Walter was there for weeks. Gordon had kept him in a chicken coop for weeks and was just going out and torturing the poor boy, saying he was going to let him go, trying to get Sanford to join in on all of this. And again, Gordon's parents come and visit, and Sanford takes them out to the chicken coop and shows them Walter. And Gordon's mother says, well, we can't take the boy back now. They'll know it was us who took him, so we have to just dispose of him. And Gordon and his mom, including Sanford because they made him, disposed of Walter Collins. When all was said and done, Gordon potentially killed up to 20 boys on the farm. But not our boy Sanford. He was able to escape, and it's actually because someone called to do a welfare check on him that the cops even found out what was going on in the chicken coop in general. Gordon was sentenced to death when he was 23 years old, but Sanford lived until 1991 and had, all things considered, a pretty normal life moving forward. Do you think we've all lived past lives? For 4-year-old Ryan, it started with a nightmare. Ryan would wake up in the middle of the night crying and tell his mom that he wanted to go home. His mom would insist that he was home, but Ryan would say, no, my home is in California. I belong in California. He told her that he lived on a street with the word rock in it. He told his mom all of these stories about being an actor in Los Angeles that his mom kind of assumed were just made up. But then Ryan started telling his mom stories about Rita Hayworth, which is an old Hollywood actress that no 4-year-old would really have known of. These stories were so vivid that Ryan's mom actually picked out a few books on old Hollywood just to see if anything matched. One day they were going through the books together, and Ryan ended up seeing a picture of an extra in a movie Night After Night. And he immediately starts freaking out. He goes, "That's me! That's me!" The man was Marty Martin, an old film extra turned Hollywood agent that died in 1964. He was by no means a household name, but Ryan knew so many details about his life, like how many kids he had, how many times he was married, and even where he lived. Which was a street with the word rock in it because he lived on Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills. The older Ryan got, the more his memories of Marty faded, but he was actually studied by a professor at the University of Virginia who was trying to make sense of Ryan and other children who've supposedly lived past lives. And the Today Show actually did an interview with Ryan where you can learn more about this case. We're talking about spooky Paris this week, and though this plaza at the Hotel de Ville might look cute and romantic, it was actually the place of thousands of public executions during the French Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror was between 1793 and 1794 during the French Revolution. At the time, essentially you were either for the revolution or you were against the revolution, and if you were against the revolution, they were going to kill you for it. This was because at the time, the Paris jails were actually overflowing, so a new law was introduced that basically said you could accuse anyone of a counter-revolutionary crime directly to their face. You didn't have to go through the police anymore, and the only options were acquittal or execution. So basically, you were innocent or you were dead. It's estimated that at this time, 600,000 people were arrested and 50,000 of them were executed. About a third of these executions were done by guillotine, which also, side note, guillotine might sound like an old and barbaric form of execution, but actually the last one happened in 1977. So if you visit the Hotel de Ville, don't go at night because you never know whose ghost you'll run into. In honor of my podcast, Heart Starts Pounding, being released exclusively on Amazon Music starting tomorrow, here's 3 podcasts to check out if you're looking for something scary. If you have kind of a low tolerance for scary and just want something spooky and fun to listen to, definitely check out my new podcast, Heart Starts Pounding. Each episode is a real scary or unexplained story told by the person who experienced it, and I do a deep dive to try to explain it. If you're looking for something just a little bit scarier, definitely check out My Favorite Murder. They do really deep dives into true crime cases, but the women who host are so funny, it never really gets all that scary. If you love to get scared and don't mind losing sleep, you have to check out Morbid. It's a research-heavy true crime podcast, and they don't spare any details for the listeners. Like any. All of these podcasts and more can be found on Amazon Music. Don't have a subscription? Head to the link in my bio for a free trial. Just click getamazonmusic.com/heartstartspounding for your free trial, and then tell Alexa, "Hey Alexa, play Heart Starts Pounding." How did these people just disappear into thin air? So in 1900, a boat was carrying a man named Joseph Moore to an island in the Flannan Isles, where he was set to replace 3 lighthouse keepers. Except when he got there, the 3 men were nowhere to be found, and it looked like they left in a hurry. Half-eaten food was still on the table, and one of the men had left their coat behind. Interesting to note that the kitchen clock had also stopped working. After a full investigation, the men were never found, but a captain's log was retrieved. The men had actually written about a storm 3 days prior, but no one else in the area had reported there being a storm. They also mentioned in the log that the storm had passed, so that wouldn't have been the cause of their deaths. But the log had other concerning information in it, like the fact that their mental health was starting to deteriorate. But there was no sign of struggle, no sign of foul play, just an empty lighthouse. It's been 120 years and no sign of the men has ever been found. The leading theory is that a wave had swept them away, but at the time the sea was calm. And it's kind of hard to believe that 3 expert lighthousemen were swept away in a wave. We'll probably never know what happened. H.H. Holmes might be one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. But how did he get away with killing for so long? Holmes had actually built a hotel for travelers visiting the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and he carefully constructed it to be able to conceal his dark intentions with his guests. See, Holmes had a large vault in the middle of his hotel, and he would trick women to go inside by asking them to grab him some papers. He would then pump gas into the vault to asphyxiate them. There were also stairs and hallways that went to nowhere, giving the hotel a maze-like feel. Holmes targeted women just in town for the weekend, knowing no one would look for them. Holmes confessed to 27 murders, but historians are convinced that there's more. Victims included 3 mistresses, the child of a mistress, and all 3 of his business partner's kids. I think these people captured a ghost in their live photo. So here we are, everything's looking normal, but then when you press it, what is that? I'll show it again in slow motion, but look, behind this boy, it's something on all fours. It feels demonic. There's something there.